I would like to segue now into, yes, World Building 101. You've made a whole community around it. It's an incredible community to be a part of as someone who's also in that Discord. Thank you for putting that
You.
together. And yeah, let's just throw it back to all of y'all. What is your process for world building? Tell me about just the first thing that comes to mind when someone says world building, almost as a thought experiment. Where do you begin? And I know we all have our homebrew worlds that we've had, some of us for years. So what's your process? What are your thoughts? What are your burning things that you want to talk about with regards to world building?
I
I've
have
only
so
built the
many
one
thoughts,
world.
so I want you guys to go first. So,
Yes, I've only
Fair
built the
enough.
one world, but I've been developing it for about 8 years, so it's put all of that care and attention into it. I know that when I started it, I focused largely on geography. I sort of focused on a singular supercontinent, then many different island chains and the societies that sort of would evolve around that naturally. Like a very large, somewhat oppressive colonial force in the continent that colonized all those islands. Those islands fought for independence, but there's still neo-colonialist ties sort of putting their control over it, and that oppressive government was then overthrown during the first campaign that I ran in the setting. Then I looked at the world and realized there's not enough geography here, so I decided that the magic returning to the world caused subcontinent-sized land masses to rise safely from the ocean. Uh, I suppose the effort was for me that I just thought of the geography into relevant cultures, into how that would sort of formulate around it. But again, I would really struggle to try and build something new. I'm so very invested in what I've created, and I'm confident that if anyone asked me any sort of question about my setting, I would have a relatively competent answer, and then would be able to go back, write something for 30 minutes, and then fill in any gaps. Which is probably a problem on my part, but I'm willing to look past it because I love my setting so much.
I also started with geography. Like the first thing I did was about 15 years ago. I took the ideas that I had had in my head since I was 11 or so and kind of just scribbled them all down and was like, what does this world look like? Like I have all these ideas in my head, but the only way for me, I don't know if it's ADHD, but the only way for me to actually visualize that and put it into a manageable campaign and do the lore is to actually draw the map first. So I took the time to draw this on two different pages to draw all of the different continents, and I'm not an artist, I'm not a map maker, so it's a lot of very low quality scribbles. But I took that, and when I really sat down to do the world, I put it all from these two sheets of paper into Incarnate, which is a fantastic map making tool. They do not sponsor us, but
Excellent.
if they want to, hey, here we are. But it is an absolutely incredible tool. I pay for the premium version, and I was
So
able
do I. It's
to,
worth it.
yeah, I was able to create, to go from these scribbles to the world, and the lore kind of almost writes itself in a way, and having that visual will also help sort of iron out any irregularities or inconsistencies in your world building, because it's like you can have a visual reference. And then I also went from Incarnate to World Anvil and then did the timeline. So I went from rough sketch to a full map to a timeline. And after I had those two things, after I had the official map and the timeline, everything else sort of began to fill itself in around that. I also made the factions right around the same time because that was something that I was able to kind of do simultaneously. But with those three things, everything else for me was able to completely blossom from those three things, and from small town demographics, populations, the intricacies of how the politics of the world works. It all comes from having the map, having the timeline, and having the factions. And it's just, you just add layers and layers and layers to those three things. So that would be my personal advice to anyone world building. But again, that's just my process. everyone has a process that works best for them. But as someone with ADHD who's very task oriented, for me, I had to do map, timeline, factions, and then layer, 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 layer.
That's certainly how I did it way back when.
Mhm. I think that makes a lot of sense. So, like, for me, all of my world building kind of started off in written RPGs. So, someone putting together a setting, putting together, like you said, a map, some factions, a timeline, whatever, and then just building from there. And it was always like this checklist of things we wanted to have. When it came to actually finally starting my own, though, I started at a very different, like, conceptual style phase. Like, my first instinct, if it's not like some random dream I had or some random like shower thought of like that would look really cool, and then going from there, I usually go to like Spotify and I start a playlist. Like, this is the vibe of my adventuring party, or this is the vibe of, the main city that they're in. And on the visual aspect of that, starting with Pinterest and doing like a location board or a character mood board or something like that, where, like, obviously you have to be careful because a lot of that artwork isn't properly attributed. So it's not like you can actually share it, but it's good for just a visual inspiration and kind of starting off and getting the feel of things. If you're feeling intimidated by actually like sitting down and beginning the process of writing or map making or any of that, like, it's like you said, Eryn, it's Essie, it's just that like scribbling aspect of it, right? Like, just brain dump into some fashion that works for you, and whatever medium that might be, is just a way to get the gears going and start the process. Because once you get going, it's kind of hard to stop. It's kind of hard to be like, okay, I got to stop thinking about this world, because after that, it just takes over your life, and that's all you want to think
Yeah,
about.
and I too have a Pinterest board for D&D, which also gives me a lot of ideas. And every time, whether I'm doing the map or the factions or the
Mm-hmm.
timeline or the layers, I always have Spotify going with. Now, and what's interesting is that you're right, with Pinterest, a lot of it is you got to be careful with some of the art, but with Spotify, I can share it as well. There is a whole community out there of royalty free artists who wish to provide, and Folkard is one of them,
Yeah.
provide music for D&D campaigns, or at least I think your stuff is open source for
Yeah,
your
you
music.
can just take it, play it, do your
Excellent stuff, and for
videos,
that we're
whatever.
grateful.
I didn't want to
I don't want to
imply
assume.
or assume, but I
No,
think for now,
no,
for the time
it
being,
really
it's
is.
okay.
Yeah.
But there is an incredible community out there of artists who produce this music for D&D that we can use to inspire us, to inspire our worlds, and to play at our tables. And music is such a big part of just being a human that of course it would be part of world building.
It
I
must be a
always
very
use music.
universal. It must be a very universal thing to collate things with music and with Pinterests as well.
Yeah.
I use
I
it a
don't think
lot.
yeah,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I don't think I can. just. I wanted to say that I don't think I can make a valuable input into this, because, as I said, I don't have any, like, too much of an experience world building, but I was just gonna say that, as you've said, everybody has their own process, and to me, I wouldn't start with a map. Like, to me, geography is is boring. Uh, and as I told you earlier, when I was creating my first world, I think I started with geography, and I think that's because it turned out bland, because I'm bad at this. So I'm just kind of, to me, it's like putting yourself into a frame. Like, oh, okay, so this be like the drawing stuff before you actually understand how big you want this kingdom to be. Maybe you want a huge magical scar on the land, but you never thought of it before. So now, uh, what I do is I start with like an image. Um, I play Magic the Gathering, and it has tons of just crazy beautiful artwork, and it always inspires me. And again, as I said, something like of cosmic proportions. I really like to like think of a picture like a huge like graveyard of giants or something. Just some ancient battle, and then this is the battlefield, and like dragons versus giants or something. And now some of them turned into mountains or something. And I think of something like that, and then I think of some other place that I'd like to see. Some huge flying city. I like flying floating islands. This is like a cliche thing, but I love it. Yeah.
Same. I always, every time I make a map, regardless of where it is, I always stop for a second and say, you know what would be really cool? A couple of floating islands. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Hallelujah Mountains. There's something very universal about them, and it's just like,
Yeah.
you got to think of what sort of societies would live all the way up there. But it's, I suppose, like to sort of build on what Yuki was saying, it's important to world build for the game you're about to run. There's no point building like grand sweeping kingdoms if you're doing a political werewolf style thing in a couple of villages.
Yeah,
able
totally.
to know where you're playing and what sort of story you want to tell is essential for the world you want to build. Obviously, if you have the time and the mental brain space to put together this like sweeping vast kingdoms and continents, that will be helpful in the long run. But if you want to just like sort of focus on a set of characters in a situation, fill the space, because you can build a world inside a dungeon. You can make some spidering caverns underground somewhere, and then it'll build itself as you go up to it. I remember SE, when we had our conversation on my show, we talked about procedurally generated sort of things like in games. Sometimes if your game master is strong enough to be able to do that, then as long as you write it down later, you've built the world within the confines of the session. So yeah, there's never any real pressure to have this like grand sweeping thousands of years of history, great vistas, and the New Zealand Tourism Board approved shots of your party walking across mountains. You can have as big as little as you can be, and it will still be a world in as far as whatever story you want to tell in your game.
That is a great filming of the Lord of the Rings reference there, by the way.
What are you talking about? Those movies were a 9-hour tourism commercial for visiting New Zealand. Worked on me.
That's incredible. Because
Yeah, I
I hear
totally
you.
dig
Mhm.
the idea of like thinking of a gameplay first, and that's kind of the thing for me. Like I think of an image and I see like what I want my players to do. For instance, I was running this game in Baldur's Gate. It was supposed to be an intro to Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, but it turned into a separate campaign, and we just wrapped it up, and that's it. We never got into the actual module. And by the way, it was one of the best campaigns I ever did.
That's wild because we did the exact same thing. We ran the Baldur's Gate adventure and we had supplements, but we never
Right.
did anything else. We never went to Avernus. Avernus has problems. That whole book has issues,
Yeah. The
motivational
thing
issues,
is,
everything.
yeah, I mean, the book offers like a variant background and a dark secret for the party. So we created this dark
Yes.
secret, and I thought, we should, resolve it somehow. And that's it. Like the entire adventure, like revolved around that. The players murdered a guy, and there was this detective who turned out to be super powerful and whatever. But yeah, I wasn't talking about that. Again, I had this image in my mind, and again, I rip off stuff from media. I don't care. My players love it.
Same.
So I
Every
thought,
storyteller does.
Yep.
yeah. No, but I'm just blatantly.
Every player does.
Yep.
Sometimes they can dress it up, but the whole deal is to own it. There's nothing wrong with being inspired.
Yeah, so I wanted, I had this undead elf who was one of the crew members of my party was pirates, and one of my players was the captain, and they had the crew. I used Ghosts of Salt Marsh book to create like a ship and the crew. And I just came up, I want a goblin to be a cook, and I want this dude to be like what is a quartermaster, right?
Yeah.
So I just imagined like an undead elf, it was just an undead elf. But then as the sessions went by, I thought, well, who is he? And I figured that he was a vampire. And then I started kind of developing the theme, and I thought that he was from another world, and that he has a brotherhood of vampires. And I kind of ripped off the Wild Hunt from The Witcher. So this brotherhood of vampires were traveling through multiverse on a ship. And at what point of the campaign they were fighting with this detective in his pocket dimension prison. It was super exciting. It doesn't matter. They got rescued by this ship, and this ship teleported to their home world. And that was my chance to world build a little bit while just branching off from the Forgotten Realms a little bit. So again, I just had this random images. I thought about the Skyreach Castle from Dragon Age Inquisition. It's just high on the top of the mountain, surrounded by mist, and you can see nothing. You just go out on the balcony, and it's just milky mist and nothing else. And I had this image, and I just created stuff revolving around it. And I figured that the entire planet was wiped out by a interstellar plague of vampirism. So there's a vampiric goddess who travels the multiverse and just sucking the life out of worlds. And again, I saw a picture somewhere of like a flying leviathan, like huge, just fish.
Sounds
And
sounds like an astral dreadnought, maybe.
Yeah.
Whatever. It was like a screenshot from somewhere. I don't know. And I thought I won this thing in my game.
Right.
So while they were there, they were actually burying their friend. One of the PCs died, I suppose, but because the guy left the group. Whatever. And while they were running this funeral, so this goddess with her vampiric marsh, she showed up, and this leviathan just jumped from the hyperspace like the Star Wars Star Destroyer, and they and it started spitting out like vampires with wings. I don't know, ghouls, whatever. And so my players were riding riding bats, huge riding bats, and they were flying. They were fighting with these guys, and it was like a Star Wars. I don't know, what do you call it? Like a dogfight.
Yeah.
So then they went on this ship of those vampires, because those were the good vampires versus the bad vampires, and they fired huge cannons of radiant damage into this leviathan, and it was a brilliant session. Everybody was thrilled. It was super epic. And then they came back to boring Baldur's Gate, and we finished the campaign. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing in Avernus could top that. Like,
Yeah.
you have like a cosmic dogfight like that. That's the closest thing you could get to like a high fantasy battle you have in Star Wars almost. That's the wonderful thing of just like being able to let player agency just shape an entire story, and as long as the DM's madness and genius is willing to keep up with whatever natural direction the story goes in, you can really come up with some great stuff, which is I'm still sort of blown away a little bit. I'm just trying to think of how best to
that's
mechanically
awesome.
rule that, but you should never be like tied down by mechanics of just like things flying around and
I
blasting.
basically used Ghosts of Saltmarsh guidings to figure out the air combat by just translating the sea combat to that.
That's a good way to do it.
That's
yeah,
wild.
everybody just did the same thing. Just quartermaster has in their action, the guy on So somebody uses weapons, somebody uses something else, and but it's flying, and everybody's just describing. And I had an experience because I ran Star Wars, the Edge of Empire, the Fantasy Flight games, and it's very abstract. I love the Fantasy Flight game, so this Genesis RPG system and their Star Wars, because of how abstract it is, and it's really the emphasis is just on narrative and storytelling, and nobody cares. They don't have feet for spells or weapons. They have just ranges. So you're at short range or whatever, and your move is just going from short range to medium range, and that's it. So you don't have, because in D&D, especially if you play with grid, there might be a case when your player is like 35 feet away from a guy and he's just 30 feet just reaching with his sword, and then that's boring. Like, why? I mean, so I usually say, yeah, you reach him, whatever, because waiting for an entire turn, and that's sort of my philosophy around everything. Because I tried using Ghosts of Saltmarsh rules as written, just on grid. So okay, you drive the ship there and you turn it 45 degrees, and we almost fell asleep doing that. So I thought, okay, I'm never gonna do this again. Just describe me. What are you doing? And I'll tell you what happens. And that's it. I just read. I just had the book, the rules, and I'm thinking, well, something like this happens. Just based on these rules, I think that this is how it plays out. So that's the way, to me.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think it all ties back into Adam's point earlier of just like being flexible and being able to adjust as you go along. Like world building's the same way. The perfectionist in me, as you said, Folkard early on, like you want to do things from start to finish. You want to do that checklist that's in the Dungeon Master's Guide of like starting with a settlement and building it out. But sometimes you just have to like do one thing, whatever that inspiration was, and just go for it. Like put it out there, build it as you go. You're going to come up with things that you wouldn't have thought on your own in this collaborative environment. Like that's
and
why
your players might help you do that.
Exactly. They'll help you work out like kinks or like things like the little details you wouldn't have thought of that really like will take it to the next level if you just start working on it. And I think this goes for D&D. I think this goes for book writing, just finding a collaborative community to kind of build upon. But yeah, I mean, I have a book that I like kind of bought when I was like first like, okay, I'm gonna go write a novel. I'm gonna, flesh out my world ahead of time. And it's been really useful to reference. It's called like the only world building workbook you'll ever need. And so it like
Yes, I've
literally
heard of that
thinks
one.
of, yeah, it literally thinks of like everything you might need from like, political, economical, anything like that. But I have never actually completely filled it out because I'm like, you know what? Today I feel like thinking about this. And so I'll go look at that section and we'll talk about it. But like you just have to be willing to put it out there and start going, and it'll all come together in the best way possible.
If you send me in more information about that in a DM, I can put it in the description of the video.
Sure.
So you'll find it down below in the doobly-doo. So I think a good way to accentuate all of that would be to say, what's more important, 5 feet of movement or losing your players in the moment?
Mm-hmm.
And to everyone's point, it's or to Folkard's point, it's like you want to do what's going to keep the pace and to keep things exciting, even if you have to again bend that 5 feet of movement, because reality is not as rigid as, okay, I can move this amount of distance in this amount of time. Things can change. People can be motivated to do great feats of strength, and it sometimes the strict rules of D&D 5e don't always translate to a user experience that is
I mean, they're not very strict.
Yeah.
As strict as you want them to be.
Exactly.
That's what I don't understand about some people, that you try to follow every single number. Because to me, like, I mean, I don't judge. There's no wrong way to play D&D, but to me, like, I just don't understand, why would you play a role-playing game to be super technical about it, like mechanically. You can just go ahead and play a war game or like a tactical game that actually has rules and is competitive or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Because I mean, role playing game, it has so many tools, and you were just limited it down to pew pew.
Yeah, as a DM, I can say that my worst group experiences in D&D have been from rules lawyers and have been from really stringent rules lawyers to the point where they almost ruin the experience for other people. Yes, exactly. I have had
It says on
players
this
like
page
that,
that you can't do this and this in the same turn. Those
Yeah.
people, yeah.
exactly.
There's a
No, I
place
mean-
for it, but it should. But
Yeah, there's a
personally,
place
I
for
feel
it.
there's a
Because
place for it.
sometimes a player would like say, "Well, can I do this and then this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." But another player is sitting like, "Are you kidding me? I just
Yeah.
moved 10 feet and slipped on the ice, and that's it." And this guy just does 3 actions.
Mhm.
So sometimes it's good to point out some inaccuracies.
Yeah, it's a fine line to walk though. Like in that situation, that seems reasonable, but to have every other thing that you say be, you know, a very aggressive, very angry, almost irritated correction of the
Mhm.
rules, it's just kind of like, why are you even playing? Why are you
Right.
even
They're kind
here?
of there. They're meant to be guidelines. They're there as a
Yes.
tool for you to use if you don't have, or if you in the moment don't want to have to think of how to handle that or how to, turn that into a mechanic. But really, it's all about in the moment, like what works for you, what works for your
Mm-hmm.
group. Like it's about that experience. It's not about the books. It's not about the modules. It's not about any of that. It's about like, we're here to have fun and play together and role play together. Like build on that. That's really the only thing you need to be worrying
Yeah.
about. You don't need to worry about all of the written rules that a bunch of people wrote in a room really far away.
Right. And I also think that in the process of talking about both world building and about modules versus homebrew, I think we've had a lot of advice for new DMs, and we're going to continue, I think, throughout this roundtable to just kind of sprinkle in advice for new DMs. I think we can kind of merge that with the rest of the topics. But we're making good time. Does anyone have any final thoughts on World Building 101 or world building advice for new DMs? What are your big takeaways from this before we take a break?
I better not start talking because I'll talk for another 40 minutes on this.
I think the beautiful thing about us as collaborative storytellers, because that's what Dungeons and Dragons is. It's a collaborative storytelling medium. Just be aware that you are building the world with the players around you. It's not just the fact that you're rocking up with a campaign for them to play in. They are also contributing to the world,
Yes.
to the world that you're building together. So be open to their suggestions. I can tell you some extreme examples in the fact that in the first campaign I ever ran as a dungeon master, so the players walked through a city and saw a grand Colosseum arena sort of building, and they asked, "Oh, are we going in?" Then I looked at what I had prepared, looked at them, looked back at what I had prepared, and said, "Okay." And the first combat encounter was them up against some monsters. And that's a reasonable thing of just allowing them to have that agency to go inside. But then again, you also need to toe the line because sometimes your players might invent Deliveroo in your setting, as some of my players did. They know who they are.
Yeah, that's huge. Collaborative storytelling. That's the biggest thing to remember. That it is a collaborative game. It's a collaborative effort, and that the story is only going to be good if it's a collaborative storytelling effort. There is a moniker that I think we have all heard several times, and that if you want to write a book, you should write a book. If you want to create a world, you should create a world. They are two completely different
And
things.
I want to add, if you want to run a game, run a game.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because sometimes people, they think, oh, I'm gonna create every NPC in the world, like 5 billion NPCs. I have a friend who tries to build his world for 2 years, and he just never starts the game. Like, I'm like, when are we gonna play? And he's like, well, I'm not sure. I don't have enough quests. I'm like, what quests? What are you talking about? Like, he's like, well, what if they gonna go somewhere where I mean, to be fair, he's a very new DM, and moving to sort of gliding to the next topic of advice and advice on world building. A sort of, I don't know, just run a game for God's sake. And don't my top number one advice for everybody in the world, not only DMs, is not to be afraid of failing. Like, embrace your failures. It's good. Like, you're gonna have a couple of really bad games. Doesn't matter how much you prepare. It's gonna happen. Just deal with it. You're gonna be embarrassed. I mean, maybe you're lucky and no, but yeah, you're gonna have a couple of disastrous games. And if the later you start, the I don't know, the worse, I guess, because by the time you could have become a better DM by the point, but you're just delaying all the time. And some DMs don't actually realize that, okay, you're not coping with the world building, but it's not the main thing. You don't have to build the entire world. Just build one single location, not even a town. And like the question, what if they go? Well, make them care so much about the thing that they're on right now, so that they don't even want to go. And so world building kind of goes hand in hand with other aspects of storytelling and adventure design. Uh, it's really important to make a session zero, and I love creating the
It's a good
characters
segue.
with the players. Yeah, and when I'm writing my own adventures, I always start with characters' backgrounds. I tell them, okay, because sometimes, well, what do my players want to see? Well, if they included something in the background, obviously they want to see that, right? Like, I don't know, some seeds. You can just read the backgrounds, read the players' stat blocks. I mean, character sheets, what they're proficient with, and there you go. You'll come up with encounters based on that stuff. Their inventory, everything, and you don't even have to think. All the answers are on character sheets, and your players are never going to be bored or disappointed because they say, "Oh, I have this spell. I can create water to turn out to put out the fire." This like they have
Right.
create water, and it's like, how are you going to even use that? Like, a random situation can hardly occur when you actually have to create water, unless you see it in your character's sheet and you come up with a proper encounter. And I never thought of it for several years when I started, to just base my encounters on players. And I forget what was it.
No, it's really funny that you bring up shape or create water, because our good friend Tribal from the Netherlands was in our Monday home game, and they had rejoined us after a hiatus, and they were going through their new spells because I just leveled them up to match the party, and they said, Eryn, create or destroy water, because they were fighting in a troll, and they said, can I create water in the troll's throat to waterboard them? Like, what? I guess there was like a big lake over there, so we kind of homebrewed something weird in that moment. But I will never look at shape or create water the same way ever again. I am forever scarred by that one player.
I could raise you with the prospects of enlarge, but I think we'll save that for possibly for the D&D horror stories section later down the. It's not a horror story like, oh my god, this is a disaster that's going to ruin the game. This is okay, my players are strange sort of deal, but we'll get to that.
Well,
eventually.
that has come up several times for anyone that is here from our actual play live stream, as and also fans of Rory Brown Designs. Rory, their bard, is in a committed relationship with a frost giant. So the concept
Wow.
of enlarge, reduce has come up several times over the course of the campaign and continues to come up regularly in the cast chat as well. You can call it a horror story, but the puns and the jokes, there are plenty of them, and we even made a video of it, which is on our YouTube channel. You can find lewd frost giant puns,
I just
many
had
of which about enlarge reduce.
a picture in my head appeared, like they're sitting in an opera house,
Yeah.
and suddenly she loses concentration. The guy just
No, but the trouble with
collapses the
enlarge,
ceiling.
no, but the trouble with enlarge is it only lasts a minute. So the lead singer of the opera just starts going into a massive solo, and then just all of a sudden, just massive enemy.
Yeah.
But we do have a whole video on that, so you can go check it out on our YouTube channel. But Liza, final thoughts on world building? I know I'm happy that we're bringing it all back together with the one and only world building woman. So take us out of world building 101 and world building advice for new DMs. Final thoughts, Liza.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've covered so much of it, so many good things. I really like my biggest piece of advice is just going to be like start with whatever is in your head. You know, like Folkard said, that one image and run with that in whatever direction it takes you, whether that's a checklist, whether that's a map, like even if it's like I'm just gonna, you know, put this as the setting for my next one shot and go from there. That's whatever you need to grease the wheels of your mind to get it going. That's what you need to do to get started. And from there, it's just kind of like an accountability thing of like showing up on time, and whether that's a session with your players or, you know, a writing block. You know, I think Folklore mentioned like maybe just putting some time and being like, I'm going to stream and during this time, I'm going to work on this. Like, I don't know. It goes from there. But I think we've all covered a lot of really good points that I would have brought up.
By
Yeah.
the way, talking to your players, like, what do you guys want to see in the world?
Yeah.
Yes.
What themes? What biomes? Or what is
Yep.
called? Yeah, it could be in handy.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts on world building, and we're going to talk about session 0 next.